So in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can add a guest to your podcast project. Now, as we're working on podcasting in Soundtrap in school, the security settings will not allow us to invite guests into the podcast from outside of school, which is not a bad thing because security is important anytime you're working on the internet or in the cloud. But here's one workaround that you can use if you want to work with another student in creating a podcast. What you have to do is you are going to interview all of your dialogue and your questions on your project. And what I've done for this example is I've invited my son as a collaborator on this, and I'm going to get him the questions that I'm going to ask, and he's going to record his answers on his end, and then we're going to sync those together, and then I'll show you how to organize that to put together your podcast. So to start off, I'm going to add a new track, and I'm going to be using voice microphone. And here's the microphone I'm using. That looks right. And so now I'm going to start recording. I get the countdown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of McConnell's Music Makers. I am your host, Mr. Jones, and this is the podcast that brings you all the latest news and events from our music technology lab. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this episode, I will be interviewing my son about the movies Star Wars and Avengers, which ones he likes and which ones he doesn't. It's all compare and contrast. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here today. So I'm just pausing a little bit in between. In this podcast, we're going to be comparing Star Wars and the Avenger movies. Let me start by asking you, which one do you think has the best heroes? Who do you think the better villain is, Thanos or Kylo Ren and Emperor Palpatine? Tell me, who is your favorite character in Star Wars and why? Now tell me, who's your favorite character in the Avengers movies and why? And then I'm going to stop the recording. And so now I have all the dialogue that I have recorded here in my Soundtrap project. Now I'm going to switch over to what William will be seeing on the other end and how he's going to record his part. Now the important thing is that I get these questions to him first so he can think about the answers before he records them. And you could do that by either sending them like in an email, or you could even maybe type the questions over here in the collaborator window for them to answer on the other side, but that may take a little bit longer. So once I sync on my side, the audio is going to show up over here on William's computer. Now, for him to record his side, he really doesn't want to hear my audio. So I'm going to mute this track first. And then I'm going to add a new track, and I'm going to select voice and microphones. Make sure that I have the microphone that I want. And then what I've done is over here in the collaboration window, I've typed in the questions that I want him to answer. So when he's ready, he's going to click start recording, and he's going to record his side. Start with the countdown. So he's going to read my first question over here. Hello, William. Welcome to the podcast. So if I was Will, I would respond, hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today. Let me see, what series do you think has the best heroes? Well, I like Star Wars and I like the Avengers Affinity War. Okay, let me see. Which one is the best villain? Well, as far as the best villain goes, okay, so what's your favorite Star Wars character? Okay. My favorite Star Wars character would probably have to be Kylo Ren because see my favorite Avenger. So my favorite Avenger would probably have to be Spider-Man because so let me see what I was remember. So if I had to pick a favorite between the two, I mean I like them both a lot. Avengers would have to be my favorite. Thanks, Charlie. Well, thanks for having me on your podcast. I enjoyed the conversation. Bye. So once your partner finishes recording their part, they're going to hit the stop button. And then the important thing for them also is to sync. So when they sync, when I go back to my computer for the original project, I'm going to see all the audio that he just recorded to go in my project. So I'm going to switch back over to that computer while this is syncing and uploading, and I'll show you how to take these two audio tracks and do some editing to put it together into one podcast. So once your partner, or in my case, William, played by me, records their audio on the other end and when they click their sync button, I'll see a sync button pop up on my side. So now if I click on my sync button here, it's going to upload the audio that he recorded on his end. And so now I've got to start editing all this to put it together for the podcast. So this is how I'm going to do this. So first of all, I'm going to mute his track, and I can rename the tracks if I want to, just to help me keep them straight. So I'm going to start by just taking the host track, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to press play to listen. Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of McConnell's Music Makers. I'm your host, Mr. Okay, before we go any further, I'm going to adjust this sound because I don't want all that reverb. So I'm going to turn the reverb down. Should help. Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of McConnell's Music Makers. I'm your host, Mr. Jones, and this is the podcast that brings you all the latest news and events from our Music Technology Lab. In this episode, I will be interviewing my son about the movies Star Wars and Avengers, which ones he likes and which ones he doesn't. It's all compare and contrast. All right, so I'm going to pause this here. Now I'm going to click on the region to highlight it, and now I'm going to hold the command key down on my computer and type the letter E as in elephant. And what that's going to do is it's going to split the region. So now if I click play again, spacebar. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here today. So again, I'm going to come in here, click on the region, Command E. So I'm just pausing a little bit in between. In this podcast, so that little part I don't want, so I'm going to put my playhead over here. Move it where I want to make my cut. Oops, let's take this magnet off. I'm going to do Command E, and then I'm going to click on this part to highlight it and just delete it. In this podcast, we're going to be comparing Star Wars and the Avenger movies. Let me start by asking you, which one do you think has the best heroes? So again, I'm going to pause, click on the region, Command E. Okay, so I just followed that process through. So now I'm going to go down to the audio that was recorded on the other side and go through that same process. So he's going to read my first question over. So again, let me turn the reverb down. Here, hello, William. Welcome to the podcast. So if I was Will, I would respond, "Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today." So again, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to use this Command E to cut out the parts that I don't want to use. "Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today." Let's see, what series do you think has the best heroes? Well, I like Star Wars and I like the... Okay, so now if I zoom out so I can see everything, you can see that I've got the audio cut up into pieces. So now that I have the audio cut up into pieces, I can now start moving those around. And just to help, I'm actually going to highlight all the audio down here, and I'm going to slide it over out of the way a little bit. And now I'm going to turn the audio back on for the host. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here today. All right, so that's my first question. So now I'm going to come over here and grab this little piece of audio and slide it over. I'm going to zoom in so I can see it a little better. I appreciate you being here today. Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today. Okay, so if I want to line that up a little better, and I can move this over. I appreciate you being here today. Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today. Okay, so now I'm going to take my next question and put it right behind that answer. Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast today. In this podcast, we're going to be comparing Star Wars and the Avenger movies. Let me start by asking you, which one do you think has the best heroes? So now after that first question, now I'm going to go back and I'll zoom out some more. And I'll grab that first response and bring it over. And then I'll zoom back in to get those lined up. Which one do you think has the best heroes? Well, I like Star Wars and I like the Avengers Affinity War. So as that response is going on, I now need to come back up here to these audio tracks and move them over to make room for the response. So again, let me zoom in. I think Avengers has more variety with their heroes. Who do you think the better villain is, Thanos or Kylo Ren and Emperor Palpatine? So again, after the next question, I go grab the next piece of audio from that response. And then I'm going to zoom back in to get that lined up just the way I want it. Ren and Emperor Palpatine. Well, as far as So I want the answer to start a little bit sooner, so I'm just going to slide it over. Or Kylo Ren and Emperor Palpatine. Well, as far as the best villain... music maker. And with that, you've taken two different audio tracks that were recorded in two different places, and then using your editing tools and split region to create a single podcast using Soundtrap.